Hello, Christian.
Hello, hi Sude, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you again too. How have you been?
Yeah, I've been all right, thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, we're in February, first week of February
Mm,
2026, and life so far has been quite rough. So in 2026, I would say. And
mm,
so maybe this conversation with you can bring us some joy,
hopefully,
hopefully. Love
yeah,
for you to introduce yourself for everyone who doesn't know you, who is staying and hearing you now, please.
yeah. So my name is Christian. I'm Christian Klesse, and yeah. Who am I? I guess I'm sort of partially known for the academic work I've been doing. So I work as a researcher in gender and sexuality studies, including LGBTQ plus studies and bi plus studies. And yeah, so I do research on gender and sexual politics. I work at Manchester Metropolitan University in the United Kingdom, and yeah, I'm a professor of contemporary intimacy studies, and I'm working with a research group on contemporary intimacies, sexualities, and genders. And I've I've been kind of close to bi plus politics and bi plus movements for many years. Partially because I'm a queer identified bisexual person myself, or a sort of and partially because it has also been, an important point of reference with regards to my wider interest in activism and social movements.
Awesome. That is a lot to take in. I'm very much triggered by, like positively triggered by plus politics. What is by plus politics? Because I know about queer politics, but what is it? Can you tell us more?
I mean, I'm not sure whether I'm the best person, to define what bi plus politics is about. I understand that bi plus politics is a kind of idea, an approach, forms of action which relate to addressing concerns regarding the discrimination, unintelligibility, the erasure, and the hostility towards people who fall on a wider spectrum related to bisexuality, fluid desire, fluid gender identifications, multiple gender identifications, multiple sexual and erotic interests, and intimate partner choices.
Right. I think so far you're the best person who has explained to me the by plus politics. Thank you so much. So what are you doing these days other than teaching? That I guess that is your main a daily activity kind of these days. Are you
Yeah, I
have a
teach and I also do research. For example, currently I work on a project with a postdoctoral research fellow who's from Brazil. His name is Antonio Cedera Pilau, and we work together on a project on multi-parenting and consensual non-monogamy in Brazil and the United Kingdom. So, and yeah, what do I otherwise? I like to swim. I like to stay close with my family and my beloved ones and my friends, and yeah, try to get through hard and dire times at the moment.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that's great. Self-care. Self-care is very important. So Christian, in the Bi Plus Equal conference, you had a workshop, and I personally could not join that workshop because I was most probably busy with the governance part of
mm,
the conference and the GM, the general meeting. But the questions that you've been asking in that workshops are very, very interesting. Would you mind if I ask the same questions from you?
yeah,
So,
go ahead,
yeah,
please.
because I mean,
Mm,
solidarity, for instance, for me has a
mm,
very body embodied meaning. I mean, it's really my body, my soul, mind, my soul. But what does that term mean for you? As you say, do you see it
mm.
as a concept or a value or importance, or do you see it more in action? Do you see it as an idea? So, what is solidarity for you? And
I
maybe it's
mean,
worth also to mention the title of your workshop.
oh gosh, I forgot the title of my workshop. If you've got it here, could you maybe, I haven't got,
Shifting, rooting, and geopolitics challenges for transnational organizing.
okay. Yeah, thank you so much, so much for reminding me of that. I mean, I put on that workshop at the founding event of Bi Plus Equal because that was a gathering of predominantly Bi Plus activists or people who are close to Bi Plus politics in order to create an Bi Plus umbrella organization working together across boundaries within Europe and potentially beyond Europe. So the whole context was, framed by, what I consider to be an activist event. Bi plus politics, bi plus social movements, and I think solidarity is a key concept within different social movement. And it has historically, I mean, shaped by, by various histories of struggle, labor politics, socialist politics, have thought and acted around the value of solidarity, but also, feminist social movement politics, queer, bi plus social movements. I think solidarity is an idea that it is that it is an important value to stand in for each other, but also to stand in for others who are not necessarily related to one's own, let's say, identity group or kind of activist group or interest group, um, to protect or to create living worthy conditions to um, to protect people, groups, communities from destruction, oppression, erasure, and to strive for sustainable and life worthy conditions to be together. So I think solidarity is a sort of a profoundly, a profound value dedicated towards the creation of social bonds in struggle. I don't know whether that makes sense. And I'll put on that kind of workshop partially because I thought, as a person who has done work on transnational activism in the field of LGBTQ politics, I could possibly try to share some of my insights I have gained in research, and also drawing on the experiences of my own activism over the years. Yeah, I thought it's interesting to raise the question how, let's say, different positionings of people with regards to their identities, but also with regards to citizenship rights, with regards to economic resources, with regards to geopolitics, with regards to the location in the world, with regards to their relationship to different wars and conflicts and histories of genocide, how that complicates any attempt of acting in solidarity in a social struggle. And I mean, in particular, in the kind of context of Europe, I mean, sort of most of us have, engaged with the heavy legacies of colonialism and the sort of racist and economic stratifications which have emerged out of the colonial period, so that we are aware that colonial exploitation, colonial genocides have left their traces in the landscape of contemporary Europe. So I think a European initiative to work on bi plus solidarity and beyond somehow
Manifest?
needs to address these questions as well. So the workshop was an invitation to address questions of positionality, of difference, of our own relationship toward certain forms of oppression, of certain histories. And just to ask the question, what does it matter in our everyday living together, working together, trying to build organizations together, trying to develop policy initiatives? So, who's part of that group? And how do we communicate across our differences?
So
And that
far,
leads to, that links then to the term of shifting and rooting, if we want to talk about that one as well.
Understand. So I was also wondering what about the difficulties of manifesting solidarity or implementing solidarity or showing solidarity, whatever we want to, in what degrees we want to engage with solidarity towards the LGBTQIA plus community in Europe, let's just really, or the pan-European region, and how, what are the difficulties and how we can shift it to receive more solidarity from the rest of the community towards the bi plus people and the bi plus community, because we see this invisibilization of bi plus people and bi plus movement and bi plus identity quite in every other movement. And this is not something that I want to nag about, but this is just the reality. So what are those difficulties? Because I think if we know the problem, then we can solve it. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's a kind of complex question, because if I'm not misunderstood you, there are also, let's say, two different layers towards your question. One is like, what are the difficulties, within solidarity in general, in a social movement context, in an activist context, and then what are the problems of bi plus activists and communities to find solidarity, in a wider LGBTQI plus sort of, cultural context. Did I understand you well? I mean, with regards to the first question, I think it is quite difficult, and I think it always will depend on the context. But I think something which I encountered quite frequently, for example, when I was talking with LGBTQ activists in Eastern Europe, reflecting about, there was a particular kind of research project I engaged in with my friend and colleague John Binney many, many years ago. But very often activists were kind of quite wary that, let's say, those who were coming from a Western European context very often drew on, let's say, the experience of working in social movements for much longer time, having been part of organizations for much longer time, having access to resources, and that there was an attitude sometimes of trying to educate people in Eastern European context about, how to address a certain inequality. So I think something like, let's say, an Orientalist mindset, a kind of sense of superiority, of being, but these kind of issues, I think, matter also within a European context. Yeah. So Europe in itself, is a complex and partially stratified geographical and cultural space. Gender issues, age issues mattered in these kinds of, activists contexts, which we had, engagements with. With regards to your second question, why do bi-plus activists find themselves marginalized in a wider field of gender and sexual politics? I mean, again, it's a kind of complex questions, but I suggest that complex forms of desire, complex forms of partner choice, complex forms of identification are not as easily stomached in certain cultural environments. I think there's a certain, let's say, ambiguity, a certain fluidity within bi-plus people's identifications and ways of lives and partner choices, which rub up against a desire for certainty, in particular in single issue identity political movements, when it is about gaining access to equal rights with heterosexual people anywhere, or having one's own same gender choices validated and so on. So I think there's a kind of a very often a suspicion of a lack of loyalty, a suspicion of a lack of purity, but also the assumption that bi-plus people, because they possibly have more choices, gender choices in order to live their erotic and sexual lives, ultimately they are also less reliable kind of comrades in struggle, because ultimately they are privileged and they should better stand up to their privilege, which I think does not necessarily reflect the everyday life experiences of bi-plus people, who do not necessarily find themselves validated in a heteronormative context, which may be hostile or violent or denying, and very often, do not see themselves validated in a queer or LGBT context either, which very many bi-plus people, according to my understanding, find very, very hurtful, in particular because that is basically where, you may expect to find solidarity or to find community or to find belonging. But this belonging, may be shot through with lots of everyday experiences of being interrogated, microaggressions, being ignored, being erased, and so on. And if you don't mind me adding one
Please.
aspect to that discussion. I mean, I was mostly talking now about bisexuality or bi plus, let's say, desire as a form of, let's say, erotic interest, intimate partner choice on the kind of level of sexuality, but I think there's a gender side to it as well. I mean, a lot of research suggests that bi plus movements have had a kind of a strong overlap and intersect with transgender politics as well, or also with non-binary politics, if you want to keep that separate, from kind of a transgender kind of, terminology. But I think it is an unfortunate reality that, the LGBT Q sort of umbrella approach historically always has failed in order to stand up with the same kind of, let's say, assertion and with the same willingness towards solidarity towards transgender people and also towards bi plus people. So so that's why sometimes you may see the acronym LGBT, sort of with the B in bracket and the T in bracket, because these kind of subject positions are very often treated as contingent. I think because of what I would consider to be a kind of, let's say, proximity, of lived experiences around trans and bisexuality, without wanting to equate that whatsoever, I think that by culture, by activisms, at times are not taken as seriously as they ought to, also because of the strong transgender dimension and within these spaces. That's more like an intuitive answer towards what you've been asking.
A lot of food for thought.
Yeah.
Thank you also for the strong words that you're choosing. They're very strong. So, Christian, as my last question for this very short conversation, I'm really eager to hear from you. How can we shift this to get more solidarity? Of course, Bi Plus Equal was created because we felt, as Bi Plus community activists, we felt this gap of a house to belong, a community to belong to, which is broader than a local Bi Plus friend or a Bi Plus activist and so on, while other sub-movements of the LGBTQIA plus movement have already created that let's say, house, that sense of belonging and being secure and being safe when you're talking with a friend. So when we want to strategize solidarity, inter-movement solidarity, what do you think would be the best move from or taken by the Bi Plus movement? We don't want to think for other movements, but and I also want to make sure that in my words that I'm choosing, I don't want to create a wall between different movements, because we are all fluid. Solidarity doesn't really have a wall, like this is the solidarity, but just for the simple using the simple words.
I mean, for me, I think the strength of solidarity, or let's say the version of solidarity I'm most drawn to, is, a solidarity which would always reach out and go beyond whatever kind of group, you may claim as your own or you may consider to be a part of. So I think for me, solidarity as a positive political value is at best oriented towards a coalitional politics, a coalitional approach. Always being aware that, the bi plus, let's say population or kind of bi plus communities and bi plus activist networks themselves are always made up by people who are positioned in quite different and distinctive, ways. So I think taking a coalitional approach and thinking about each political initiative as being at least potentially a coalitional approach, as always trying to reach out to include others around us is something important. And I mean, maybe to come back to that kind of let's say concepts, shifting and rooting, which are used in the title of the workshop I offered at the conference in Vilnius. And these are terms which I took from the sociological and political writing of Nira Yuval Davis, who herself has been inspired in debates within feminist coalition work in Italy, which kind of tries to name a particular, let's say, methodology of trying to create a conversation between different groups and people who are positioned differently across differences. So the idea of, if you want to work with somebody else, you always have to open your horizon. You always have to reflect about your own positionality. You have to reach out. You need to understand what others are saying, what their priorities are. And that's a kind of moment of shifting. So if you want to work with others, if you want to understand others, you need to learn ideally their language. You need to put yourself into their shoes. You need to have an understanding of their kind of cultural environments. So that's a shifting side. And the rooting side, that's the way I understand the text of Nira Yuval Davis, is that at the same time it's important to be very much aware about your own legacy, your own investments, your own values, your own needs, your own objectives, wishes, desires, and I guess in particular in a kind of communication which is structured by, let's say, inequalities and legacies of crime and exploitation. I think it is also important for those who may be part of dominant collectivities not to become silent in a moment of shame or so I think that kind of rooting, being aware where you come from, but also naming one's positions, being transparent, naming one's wishes, and always hoping to be heard as well. I think I find that kind of an interesting dynamic, which is ultimately thinking about a self-other relationship in the context of a political conversation, in the context of hopefully building, a struggle together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know it was a very short conversation, but very, very inspiring. Is there anything else that you want to add before we say goodbye?
No, I think if you're vaguely satisfied and happy with what I said in this conversation, I'm perfectly happy.
I
And
have one more question,
thank
Christian, of
yeah,
course, and
okay,
that is,
yeah.
how can we read more about your work, or how can we reach out to you?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, as I said, I'm currently employed at Manchester Metropolitan University. I've got a little stuff page there. All the stuff I've ever written and published is listed there. Many of the pieces are also available as PDFs. If you or anybody else wants to read a particular piece of work I may have ever written, I'm happy to share that. If you contact me, and yeah, otherwise I'm kind of currently involved in writing. I'm also in writing with other people. I may mention one of these projects if that's okay. So I'm working on a book manuscript with Daniel Cardoso from Portugal. So Daniel works at Lusophone University, and they are a scholar activist, an activist, but also a cultural studies scholar working on consensual non-monogamy, which is also a topic I've done a lot of work of. And we work together on a project on activism around polyamory and consensual non-monogamy in the UK and Portugal. And hopefully we will finish our little book soon, but at the moment we write a lot. So
Soon, and we're going
maybe
to
keep an
celebrate
eye
that.
on that.
Yes, we will keep an eye, and for sure,
Yeah,
as soon as it's published, we're also going to share with the audiences. Thank you so much again, Christian, for the time that you spent
yeah.
for us, and also for the amazing work that you're doing. And I
Oh,
hope these
thank you.
conversations continue.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Have a good
Sudhir.
rest of the day. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.